Welcome back to the Sleepy Mind channel. Tonight we will spend some time with you, Virgo. We will move through your qualities in the same steady way that patterns move through the night sky. If you find these zodiac sleep stories useful, you are welcome to like the video and subscribe for more. You can also explore our other videos, each created to help you fall asleep in a calm and unhurried way. If you choose to leave a comment about where you are listening from, it is always interesting to see how far these stories travel. Many listeners find it grounding to notice this quiet sense of connection. Now we begin with you, Virgo. This time is simply for you. You are often described as practical, organized, or detail-focused, usually by people who only notice the surface of what you do. What they miss is how personal that attention really is. You do not look closely because you enjoy control. You look closely because you care about things working properly and not causing harm later. You tend to experience the world as something that can be improved gently, piece by piece. A small adjustment here, a quiet correction there. You notice what is slightly off before anyone else says a word. This noticing is not criticism. It is awareness paired with responsibility. You might recognize that your mind rarely rests completely. It scans, checks, and refines almost automatically. Not because you are anxious, but because you are oriented toward usefulness. You want things to make sense. You want systems, relationships, and routines to function smoothly, so no one has to struggle unnecessarily. You are not someone who enjoys chaos, but you are not rigid either. You can tolerate mess when there is a reason for it. What unsettles you is disorder that could have been avoided with a little care. Preventing problems feels more natural to you than reacting to them. You may notice that you often take on the role of fixer without announcing it. You step in quietly. You adjust details behind the scenes. You make things easier for others without needing recognition. This service is not self-erasing. It is how you express care. You might recognize that you are deeply affected by inefficiency, wasted effort, repeated mistakes, problems that linger because no one wants to address them properly. These things irritate you, not because you need control, but because you can see how easily they could be resolved. You are rarely motivated by grand gestures. What matters to you is consistency, small improvements made regularly, habits that support well-being, systems that reduce friction rather than create it. You trust what works over what impresses. You may notice that you are particularly sensitive to being misunderstood as judgmental. When others assume your observations are criticisms, it can make you withdraw. You are not pointing things out to diminish anyone. You are trying to help things function better. You are often more self-critical than critical of others. You hold yourself to high standards quietly. When something goes wrong, you look inward first. This reflex can make you very capable, but it can also be tiring when it never switches off. You might recognize that you struggle to relax fully when something feels unfinished. A task left incomplete. A concern left unaddressed. These loose ends occupy your attention even when you want to rest. Completion brings you peace in a way that is hard to explain. You are not cold or detached. You care deeply. You simply express care through attentiveness rather than emotion. You notice what needs adjusting. You offer help before it is requested. You take responsibility seriously. You may notice that you feel most at ease when your environment reflects your values. Clean, calm, functional. Not perfect, but intentional. When your surroundings are orderly, your mind can soften. When they are not, tension builds quietly. You are not driven by perfection. You are driven by integrity. You want things to be done properly, kindly, and with consideration for how they affect others. You continue, guided by discernment and care, learning how to refine without exhausting yourself, trusting that your attention, when balanced with rest, becomes a quiet force that improves the world without needing to announce itself. You may have noticed that you often feel a quiet pull toward responsibility, even when no one has asked you to take it on. If something needs doing, you notice it. If something could be improved, you feel it. This instinct runs so naturally that you may not realize how much weight you are carrying until you finally stop. You tend to measure your worth through contribution, being helpful, being reliable, being the one who notices what others miss. When you are useful, you feel grounded. When you are not, a subtle unease can creep in, as though you should be doing something even when rest is deserved. You might recognize that you are especially hard on yourself when things do not go as planned. Mistakes linger in your mind longer than successes. You replay what could have been done differently, not to punish yourself, but to prevent repetition. This self-review is how you learn, but it can also make it difficult to switch off. You are rarely satisfied with vague solutions. General advice feels hollow to you. You want specifics, clear steps, practical changes that actually make a difference. When problems are addressed properly, you relax. When they are glossed over, tension remains. You may notice that you struggle when others dismiss details as unimportant. To you, details are where care shows up. They are how problems are prevented rather than repaired. Ignoring them feels like ignoring responsibility, and that unsettles you deeply. You often express kindness through competence. You make things easier. You anticipate needs. You quietly reduce friction for others. This kindness may not look emotional on the surface, but it is deeply intentional. You might recognize that you have a strong need for things to feel orderly before you can fully relax. Not sterile or rigid, but settled. When tasks are complete and systems are working, your mind finally lets go. You are not someone who enjoys praise for things you consider basic responsibility. Compliments can feel uncomfortable when they are focused on what you believe anyone should do. What you want is trust that you will handle things properly, not applause for doing so. You may notice that you are especially sensitive to chaos in emotional spaces, as well as physical ones. Unclear expectations, mixed messages, inconsistency. These things drain you because they create work that did not need to exist. You often hold yourself to standards you would never impose on others. You forgive mistakes easily in people you care about, but expect yourself to be more precise. This imbalance can wear on you over time. You might recognize that you feel most at ease when your efforts are aligned with something meaningful. Busy work irritates you. Tasks without purpose feel empty. You want to know that what you are doing matters beyond simply filling time. You are learning that rest does not erase your usefulness. Stepping back does not mean you have failed. Allowing yourself to pause actually sharpens your ability to contribute when it truly matters. You continue, attentive and thoughtful, learning how to offer your care without turning it into constant obligation, trusting that when you allow yourself moments of completion and rest, your clarity and kindness deepen rather than diminish. You may have noticed that you often feel most at peace when things are quietly in order, not because you need control, but because order gives you permission to rest. When nothing is obviously out of place, Your attention finally loosens its grip, and your body follows. You tend to experience stress as a low-level hum rather than a sudden spike. It builds when small things remain unresolved. An unanswered message, a task half finished, a detail no one else seems to notice. Clearing these pieces brings relief that feels disproportionate to their size, and you understand why even if others do not. You might recognize that you are especially sensitive to inefficiency that creates extra work later. Shortcuts frustrate you because you can see the consequences coming. You prefer to do something properly once rather than fix it repeatedly. This foresight is one of your quiet strengths. You are rarely interested in attention for its own sake. Being seen matters far less to you than being effective. When something works better because you intervened, that is enough. Recognition feels secondary to results. You may notice that you struggle when others interpret your standards as criticism. Being misunderstood this way can make you pull back, not because you stop caring, but because explaining your intentions feels exhausting. You know you are trying to help, even if it is not received that way. You often feel a sense of relief when someone else takes responsibility competently, not because you do not want to help, but because it allows you to stop scanning for what might go wrong. Trusting others to handle things well gives your mind a break. It rarely takes on its own. You might recognize that you have a strong instinct to improve yourself alongside improving your surroundings. Learning, refining, adjusting habits. This self-development is practical rather than aspirational. You want to be better at living, not just better on paper. You are not someone who enjoys excess, too much noise, too much clutter, too much emotional intensity. These things make it harder for you to think clearly. You prefer environments that are calm enough to allow focus and care. You may notice that you are deeply affected by feeling useful in ways that align with your values. Helping simply to stay busy drains you. Helping in ways that genuinely reduce suffering or confusion energizes you. You often carry an internal checklist of things you want to get right, even when no one else knows it exists. When you meet your own standards, you feel a quiet satisfaction. When you do not, disappointment can linger longer than you would like. You might recognize that you are learning to soften those internal standards over time, not abandoning them, but allowing room for human error. This softening does not reduce your integrity. It makes it kinder. You are not indifferent to emotion. You simply process it through action and understanding. When something is wrong, you want to know how to fix it. When something hurts, you look for ways to prevent it from happening again. This approach has served you well, even if it sometimes keeps feelings at arm's length. You may notice that you feel most settled when your efforts are clearly bounded, when there is a beginning and an end. Open-ended responsibility exhausts you. Completion restores you. You continue, thoughtful and attentive, learning how to care without carrying everything, how to refine without relentless pressure, trusting that when you allow yourself space to rest, your clarity and usefulness return naturally, steady and intact. You may have noticed that you often feel a quiet sense of relief when expectations are clearly defined. Knowing what is yours to handle and what is not allows your mind to settle. Ambiguity creates extra work for you because it leaves too much room for things to go wrong unnoticed. You tend to take satisfaction in doing things well, even when no one else sees the effort involved. Folding something carefully, choosing words precisely, fixing a small issue before it becomes a larger one. These acts may seem insignificant to others, but they help you feel aligned and calm. You might recognize that you are especially sensitive to environments where standards feel unclear or inconsistent. When rules change without explanation or responsibilities shift unpredictably, your energy drains quickly. You want to do things properly, and that becomes difficult when the framework itself feels unstable. You are not someone who seeks control over people. What you want is clarity. When roles are clear and systems make sense, you relax. When they do not, you feel compelled to step in, not out of dominance, but out of care for how things will unfold otherwise. You may notice that you often hold back from asking for help because it feels easier to do things yourself. Explaining what you need can feel more complicated than simply fixing the problem. Over time, this can leave you quietly overextended, even while appearing capable. You often express trust by allowing others to take responsibility in their own way. When they do it well, you feel genuine relief. When they do not, frustration builds, not because they failed, but because you can see the extra work now waiting ahead. You might recognize that you have a strong relationship with discipline, but not in a harsh sense. Discipline, for you, is about care over time. Small habits repeated, attention given consistently. This steadiness helps you feel grounded in a world that often feels rushed. You are rarely comfortable when people dismiss preparation as overthinking. You know the difference. Preparation prevents harm. Thoughtfulness saves energy later. Acting without consideration feels careless to you, even when it is praised as bold. You may notice that you feel most secure when your efforts lead to tangible improvement. Something clearer, something easier, something less likely to break. These outcomes reassure you that your attention is worthwhile. You often struggle when your internal critic becomes louder than your sense of compassion. You know how to improve things, including yourself, but learning when to stop refining and simply allow has been a gradual process. You might recognize that you are learning to accept good enough in places where perfection is unnecessary. This does not mean lowering your values. It means recognizing where precision truly matters and where it quietly drains you. You are not indifferent to praise, but you prefer recognition that feels specific and accurate. Being told you are amazing feels less meaningful than someone noticing exactly what you handled and how it helped. You may notice that you feel most at ease when your days have a natural rhythm of effort and rest. Constant productivity exhausts you. Purposeful work followed by genuine pause restores you. You continue, attentive and careful, learning how to refine without erasing yourself, how to contribute without carrying everything alone, trusting that your quiet diligence, when balanced with rest and self-compassion, remains one of your greatest strengths. You may have noticed that when you give yourself permission to slow down, your thinking becomes clearer rather than duller. The mind that is always refining can also become gentler when it is not under pressure to improve everything at once. In those moments, insight arrives without effort, and solutions feel simpler than you expected. You often feel most capable when your responsibilities are chosen rather than assumed. Being relied upon feels different from being taken for granted. When your contribution is acknowledged as a choice, your care deepens. When it is treated as an obligation, something in you tightens. You might recognize that you are especially sensitive to doing things properly, even when no one else is watching. Integrity matters to you in small, practical ways. Returning something in better condition than you found it. Following through exactly as promised. These details are how you build trust with yourself. You are not someone who needs constant affirmation, but you do need to know when your effort has made a difference. Seeing the result of your care allows you to rest. When outcomes are invisible or dismissed, your mind keeps working, looking for what still needs fixing. You may notice that you sometimes struggle to enjoy what you have accomplished because your attention moves quickly to what could be better. Satisfaction arrives briefly, then refinement resumes. Learning to pause inside completion, even for a moment, is something you are practicing. You often feel a quiet discomfort when things feel sloppy or careless, not because you want control, but because you can sense the cost that carelessness will create later. You carry a long view, and that awareness shapes how you move through the world. You might recognize that you are deeply affected by trust that is broken through small inconsistencies rather than big betrayals, missed details, repeated oversights. These patterns register clearly for you, even if others consider them minor. You are not trying to be difficult when you notice these things. You are trying to protect the system, the relationship, the structure that allows everyone to function without unnecessary strain. You may notice that you feel most at peace when your internal standards are aligned with compassion, when precision is balanced with kindness, when improvement includes care for yourself as well as for outcomes. This balance does not come naturally, but it is developing. You often experience relief when you allow yourself to be imperfect in safe spaces, letting something be unfinished, letting someone else handle it differently. These moments can feel uncomfortable at first, but they also free up energy you did not realize you were holding. You are not losing your effectiveness by easing up. You are conserving it. Attention that is rested becomes more accurate, not less. Care that is replenished becomes more generous, not weaker. You continue, thoughtful and discerning, learning where your refinement brings clarity and where it becomes unnecessary pressure, trusting that when you allow yourself moments of acceptance alongside improvement, your contribution remains steady, humane, and deeply valuable. You may have noticed that there are moments when your attention naturally softens, even without everything being finished. A task pauses, a concern waits, and nothing collapses. These moments can feel unfamiliar, even slightly uncomfortable, because you are used to holding things together through vigilance. Yet they also reveal something important, that the world does not fall apart the moment you stop refining it. You often feel a quiet pride in being dependable. Others rely on you because you notice what needs care and you follow through. This reliability has become part of how you understand yourself. At the same time, you are beginning to see how easily dependability can turn into self-neglect when it is never questioned. You might recognize that you have spent a long time earning rest rather than allowing it, finishing one thing before starting another, clearing every loose end before stopping. Over time, you are learning that rest does not need to be deserved through exhaustion. It can be taken because you are human, not because everything is perfect. You are not someone who avoids responsibility. You simply want it to be meaningful. Carrying what matters feels right to you. Carrying what others avoid feels heavy. This distinction has become clearer as you pay closer attention to how your energy is spent. You may notice that you feel calmer when you let some things remain imperfect, not broken, just unfinished. Allowing space for process, rather than forcing resolution, can ease the pressure you place on yourself, even if it challenges habits you have relied on for years. You often experience a deep sense of relief when someone meets your standards with care rather than resistance. When another person notices details, respects systems, and follows through, it allows your mind to rest in ways you rarely experience. Shared responsibility lightens you more than praise ever could. You might recognize that you are learning to separate usefulness from worth. Being helpful has long been a way you measured your value. Now, you are beginning to sense that you matter even when you are not fixing, improving, or refining anything at all. You are not losing your edge by making this shift. You are sharpening it. Attention that is not overextended becomes more precise. Care that is not compulsory becomes more generous. You may notice that you feel most settled when your inner critic quiets enough for your inner observer to step forward. Not the voice that demands improvement, but the one that notices what is already working. This perspective allows appreciation to exist alongside discernment. You continue, thoughtful and grounded, learning how to apply your care with intention rather than obligation, trusting that when your attention is balanced with acceptance, it remains one of the most quietly transformative forces you offer to the world. You may have noticed that when you stop monitoring yourself quite so closely, a different kind of awareness takes its place. Instead of scanning for what is wrong, you begin to notice what is already sufficient. This noticing does not dull your intelligence, it steadies it. You often feel most capable when your attention is focused rather than scattered. Too many obligations at once can blur your clarity. When you are allowed to concentrate on one thing properly, your care becomes precise and calm instead of strained. You might recognize that you have a strong instinct to prevent problems before they happen. You see where something could fray. You sense where confusion might arise. This foresight is not pessimism. It is responsibility shaped by experience. You are rarely comfortable when people dismiss foresight as worry. You know the difference. Planning ahead reduces harm. Thoughtfulness spares effort later. Being told to relax without addressing the underlying issue rarely works for you. You may notice that you feel most unsettled when your efforts are interrupted before they feel complete. Half solutions irritate you. Loose ends pull at your attention. Completion, even in small forms, gives your mind permission to rest. You often express care by noticing what others overlook. A detail that matters. A process that needs refining. A small correction that prevents larger consequences. This care is quiet and constant, even when it goes unremarked. You might recognize that you are learning to choose where to apply this care more deliberately. Not every problem is yours to solve. Not every system requires your attention. Discerning where your effort truly matters is becoming an important skill. You are not someone who thrives on chaos, but you are capable of navigating it when necessary. What you resist is chaos that could have been prevented through simple care. That kind of avoidable disorder feels disrespectful to you. You may notice that you feel calmer when your internal standards soften slightly, when precision is balanced with patience, when improvement is guided by kindness rather than pressure. This balance allows you to remain effective without becoming brittle. You often experience relief when you allow yourself to appreciate what is already working. Not everything needs fixing. Not everything needs refining. Some things simply need to be acknowledged and left alone. You might recognize that your attention is a powerful resource. Where you place it, things tend to improve. Learning when to withdraw that attention is just as important as knowing when to apply it. You continue, thoughtful and discerning, learning how to offer your care where it genuinely helps, trusting that when your attention is guided by compassion as well as clarity, It remains steady, humane, and deeply constructive. You may have noticed that as you grow more comfortable with allowing things to be imperfect, a quiet relief settles in your body. Not because you stop caring, but because you no longer feel personally responsible for every possible outcome. This relief does not make you careless, it makes you selective. You often feel most at ease when your care has somewhere clear to land. When effort leads to improvement, you can see and trust. When it does not, your mind keeps returning to the same unresolved points, trying to finish something that never quite closes. Learning to recognize when closure is outside your control is part of your ongoing adjustment. You might recognize that you have a strong preference for honesty that is practical, not dramatic confession, not vague reassurance, but clarity about what is working and what is not. This kind of honesty helps you orient yourself. Without it, you feel as though you are refining in the dark. You are rarely satisfied by surface-level solutions. A quick fix may calm others, but you feel the instability underneath it. You want problems addressed at their root, even if it takes longer. This depth of attention can feel lonely when others prefer speed over care. You may notice that you sometimes struggle to enjoy moments of ease because your attention remains trained on what could still be improved. Relaxation can feel unfinished when your mind is still scanning. Learning to let ease be complete, even briefly, is something you are practicing rather than mastering. You often feel most grounded when your contribution feels proportionate, when you are not compensating for others' inattention, when your effort matches the situation rather than exceeding it. This balance allows your care to remain sustainable. You might recognize that you have a deep respect for quiet competence, people who handle things well without needing recognition, systems that function smoothly without constant intervention. These examples reassure you that care does not always have to be visible to be effective. You are not indifferent to recognition, but you prefer it when it feels accurate. Being praised for what you did not actually do feels uncomfortable. Being acknowledged for what you handled quietly feels validating in a way that words struggle to capture. You may notice that you feel most settled when your inner standards are aligned with your outer reality, when you are not asking more of yourself than the situation truly requires. This alignment reduces the constant pressure to refine and correct. You often experience a subtle shift when you choose acceptance over improvement, not resignation, but allowance, letting something be as it is for now. This choice can feel unfamiliar, even risky, but it also creates space where new clarity can emerge without force. You continue, attentive and precise, learning when your care is needed and when it can rest, trusting that your ability to notice and improve does not disappear when you step back, but becomes sharper when it is allowed to breathe. You may have noticed that your sense of calm deepens when you stop trying to anticipate every possible outcome. Letting the future remain slightly unknown can feel uncomfortable at first, but it also releases you from the constant task of pre-correction. In that space, your mind finds a different kind of order. You often feel most capable when your effort is contained within reasonable limits. Too many open responsibilities blur your focus. When you know exactly what is yours to handle, your attention becomes sharp, steady, and effective without strain. You might recognize that you are especially sensitive to environments where responsibility is unevenly distributed. When you quietly take on what others ignore, your care turns into burden. Learning to notice this pattern earlier helps you protect your energy before exhaustion sets in. You are rarely motivated by praise alone. What satisfies you is knowing something functions better because of your attention. When a system holds, when a problem does not reappear, when something runs smoothly without needing intervention. These outcomes reassure you more than words ever could. You may notice that you struggle when people dismiss preparation as worry. You know that careful thought prevents harm. Being told to relax without addressing what needs tending feels hollow. For you, ease comes after care, not instead of it. You often express compassion through practicality, fixing something, clarifying a process, making things easier for others without drawing attention to yourself. This care is subtle, but it shapes the world around you in lasting ways. You might recognize that you are learning to soften your internal standards without abandoning them. Allowing room for error does not mean accepting chaos. It means recognizing when precision matters and when it quietly drains you. You are not someone who stops caring when you step back. You simply choose where your care can be effective. Withdrawing attention from what cannot be improved is not failure. It is discernment. You may notice that you feel more settled when you allow appreciation to exist alongside critique. Not everything needs refining. Some things need to be acknowledged as sufficient. This acknowledgement creates balance in a mind that is naturally oriented toward improvement. You often experience relief when you trust others to handle things in their own way, even if it is not exactly how you would do it. This trust frees your attention for what truly needs your skill, rather than spreading it thin. You continue, attentive and thoughtful, learning how to let your care be guided by intention rather than obligation, trusting that when you choose where to apply your discernment, it remains one of your most valuable and humane strengths. You may have noticed that when you allow yourself to stop refining for a moment, a gentler clarity appears. Not the kind that solves everything, but the kind that lets you see what actually needs your attention and what does not. This clarity feels quieter, but it is often more accurate. You often feel most settled when your effort has a natural endpoint. Knowing when something is complete matters to you. Endless improvement without closure keeps your mind busy long after the task itself is finished. Completion gives you permission to exhale. You might recognize that you are especially sensitive to being misunderstood as cold or distant. When you step back, it is rarely because you care less. It is because you are conserving energy so you can care well rather than constantly. You are rarely comfortable with careless promises. Saying something will be done and leaving it unfinished bothers you deeply. Follow through is how trust is built in your world. Without it, words feel unstable. You may notice that you often feel relief when things are simple. Clear instructions, clear expectations, clear limits. Simplicity allows your attention to soften instead of staying sharp all the time. You often express respect by doing things properly, taking the extra moment, checking the detail, making sure something will hold. This respect is practical rather than symbolic, but it is sincere. You might recognize that you struggle most when your kindness turns into self-pressure, when being helpful becomes something you expect of yourself rather than something you choose. This shift is subtle, but it makes a difference in how heavy things feel. You are learning that saying no to unnecessary refinement creates space for what truly matters. Not every problem is yours to solve. Not every detail needs your touch. You may notice that you feel more grounded when your attention is directed outward rather than inward. Constant self-correction can become exhausting. Allowing yourself to simply be, without improvement as the goal, brings a different kind of ease. You are not losing your sense of responsibility by easing up. You are sharpening it. When care is rested, it becomes more precise. You often experience peace when you trust that good enough can truly be good. That care does not require perfection. That intention matters more than flawlessness. You continue, attentive and measured, allowing your discernment to guide you without ruling you, trusting that when your care is balanced with acceptance, it remains steady, thoughtful, and deeply humane. You may have noticed that your attention naturally returns to what feels unresolved, even when you tell yourself to let it go. This is not stubbornness. It is your mind trying to ensure that nothing important is neglected. Over time, you are learning how to reassure that part of yourself without having to fix everything immediately. You often feel most capable when your effort is applied deliberately rather than continuously. There is a difference between caring and carrying. Caring sharpens you. Carrying everything dulls you. Recognizing that difference helps you decide where your involvement actually makes sense. You might recognize that you have a strong instinct to anticipate needs before they are spoken. This foresight can feel like a gift and a burden at the same time. It allows things to run smoothly, but it can also mean you take responsibility for problems that never truly belong to you. You are rarely comfortable in environments where mistakes are punished rather than addressed. Fear makes people careless in ways that frustrate you. You prefer spaces where errors are treated as information, not as failures. This approach allows improvement without shame. You may notice that you are deeply affected by respect that is shown through listening. Being heard carefully matters more to you than being agreed with. When someone takes the time to understand your perspective, your defensiveness softens almost immediately. You often feel a quiet satisfaction when your work removes strain for others, making something easier, clearer, less prone to error. These outcomes feel meaningful to you, even if no one acknowledges them explicitly. You might recognize that you sometimes hold yourself to a standard of usefulness that leaves little room for rest. Being idle can feel uncomfortable, as though you are missing something that needs attention. Learning to tolerate that discomfort is part of allowing yourself to recover. You are not someone who enjoys chaos, but you are learning that some disorder is temporary and does not require immediate correction. Letting things settle on their own can reveal solutions that forced intervention would have obscured. You may notice that you feel most at ease when your contributions are clearly bounded, when you know where your role begins and ends. Open-ended responsibility keeps your mind alert long after it should be resting. You often express care by improving systems rather than soothing feelings. When something works better, stress decreases naturally. This practical compassion may not look emotional, but it is deeply considerate. You might recognize that you are becoming more patient with yourself when progress is slow. Not everything improves on a tidy timeline. Allowing yourself to move at a humane pace reduces the constant pressure to optimize. You are not abandoning your standards. You are learning how to live with them without letting them run you. This balance is subtle and ongoing. You continue, thoughtful and observant, refining your relationship with responsibility, learning where your attention truly belongs, and trusting that when you allow yourself space to rest, your clarity and care remain ready when they are genuinely needed. You may have noticed that when you trust yourself to return to a task later, your mind loosens its grip on it now. Knowing that you will not forget what matters allows you to rest without fear. This trust is new for you, and it takes practice, but it changes how heavily things sit inside you. You often feel most at peace when responsibility feels shared rather than implied, when others carry their part without being reminded, when effort is visible on all sides. These moments allow your attention to soften instead of staying on alert. You might recognize that you have a strong relationship with intention. Doing something thoughtfully matters to you more than doing it quickly. When intention is missing, even a completed task can feel wrong. When intention is present, even imperfect work can feel complete. You are rarely comfortable when care is treated as optional. Sloppiness that affects others bothers you deeply. You see the ripple effects immediately. This sensitivity is not about control. It is about protecting people from unnecessary difficulty. You may notice that you feel a particular relief when systems begin to run without your constant involvement, when something holds on its own, when your effort has created stability rather than dependency. These moments confirm that your care has done its job. You often experience stress as a signal that something needs attention, not as something to be ignored. Learning to distinguish between signals that require action and those that require rest is part of your ongoing refinement. You might recognize that you are especially affected by being rushed past your own understanding. Being told to move on before something makes sense to you can feel destabilizing. You need time to integrate, not because you are slow, but because you are thorough. You are not someone who seeks perfection. You seek coherence. When things fit together logically and ethically, you relax. When they do not, your mind keeps working, trying to restore alignment. You may notice that you are becoming more comfortable letting others see your process rather than only your results. Allowing imperfection to be visible can feel risky, but it also reduces the pressure to appear constantly composed. You often feel most grounded when your actions align with your values in quiet ways, when no one is watching, when no recognition is expected. These moments strengthen your sense of integrity more than any external validation. You might recognize that you are learning to be gentler with your own learning curve. Improvement does not require constant self-correction. Growth can happen alongside acceptance, even if that feels counterintuitive at first. You are not losing your attentiveness by easing up. You are making it sustainable. Attention that is rested remains sharp. Care that is not compulsory remains kind. You continue, thoughtful and precise, learning how to let responsibility be a choice rather than a burden, trusting that your discernment, when guided by compassion, remains one of your quiet and enduring strengths. You may have noticed that when you stop holding yourself to constant readiness, a softer alertness takes its place. You are still aware, you still notice, but you are no longer bracing for everything at once. This shift allows your attention to move where it is actually needed, instead of everywhere it might be needed. You often feel most capable when you trust that not every detail requires your intervention. Some things resolve themselves. Some mistakes correct naturally. Allowing this to happen does not betray your standards. It honors them by reserving your care for what truly benefits from it. You might recognize that you have a strong instinct to make yourself useful during uncertainty. When things feel unclear, you look for something to fix or organize. This gives you a sense of control, but it can also pull you away from simply being present. Learning when usefulness is helpful and when it is avoidance is a subtle distinction you are becoming more aware of. You are rarely comfortable with careless urgency. Being rushed into action without understanding feels wrong to you. You want to know why something matters before you invest your effort. Without that context, Even productive work can feel misdirected. You may notice that you experience satisfaction when your work creates ease for others without creating dependency, when systems function smoothly, when clarity replaces confusion. These outcomes feel meaningful because they reduce the need for constant correction. You often feel most at ease when you can see the full cycle of effort. Beginning, process, completion. Leaving things perpetually open keeps part of your mind engaged long after the task should be finished. Closure allows you to release responsibility cleanly. You might recognize that you sometimes carry the weight of preventing mistakes that may never happen. This vigilance comes from care, but it can become heavy when it has nowhere to rest. Learning to trust outcomes rather than anticipate every possibility lightens that load. You are not someone who avoids effort. You simply want effort to be aligned. When work feels purposeful, you engage deeply. When it feels performative or unnecessary, resistance appears quietly. You may notice that you are becoming more comfortable with letting things be handled differently than you would handle them. This does not mean you think your way is wrong. It means you are allowing diversity of approach without feeling responsible for correcting it. You often experience peace when your internal dialogue softens from instruction to observation. Instead of telling yourself what to improve, you begin noticing what is already working. This shift changes how you relate to yourself and to the world. You might recognize that you feel most settled when your care is guided by compassion rather than urgency. When you act because it helps rather than because it must be done now. This timing feels humane and sustainable. You are not stepping away from responsibility. You are stepping into discernment. Knowing when to act and when to allow has become as important as knowing how to improve. You continue, thoughtful and grounded, learning how to let your attention rest between moments of refinement, trusting that when care is chosen rather than compelled, it remains clear, effective, and kind. You may have noticed that as you practice letting some things remain unresolved, your tolerance for uncertainty grows quietly. Not the kind of uncertainty that feels careless, but the kind that acknowledges life will not always be fully organized before it moves on. Allowing that truth to exist eases a pressure you have carried for a long time. You often feel most aligned when your effort feels proportionate, when the energy you give matches the importance of the task. Overgiving drains you more than difficulty ever could. Learning to scale your attention, instead of offering it equally to everything, is a skill you are developing with care. You might recognize that you have a deep respect for processes that work without constant supervision. When something holds on its own, you feel relief rather than redundancy. Your goal was never to be needed forever. It was to create stability that could sustain itself. You are rarely comfortable with being rushed past understanding. You want to know how something works, why it matters, and where it leads before you invest yourself fully. Skipping these steps feels like building on weak foundations, and you sense that risk immediately. You may notice that you are particularly sensitive to internal pressure that sounds like obligation rather than intention. The voice that says, you should be doing more even when nothing is urgent. Learning to question that voice rather than obey it automatically is changing how you experience rest. You often feel most settled when your care includes yourself as well as others. When kindness is not something you ration inwardly. This balance allows your attentiveness to remain generous rather than brittle. You might recognize that you have a strong instinct to bring order to emotional spaces too, clarifying misunderstandings, naming what feels off, creating language where confusion lived. This emotional organization is another form of care, even if it is not always recognized as such. You are not someone who enjoys leaving things messy, but you are learning that mess is sometimes part of movement rather than a failure of discipline. Allowing space for process without immediately correcting it can reveal patterns you would have missed by intervening too soon. You may notice that you feel calmer when you allow yourself to be a participant rather than a manager, being inside an experience instead of overseeing it. This shift can feel risky at first, but it also brings a sense of presence you rarely allow yourself. You often experience satisfaction when your contribution feels clean, when you have done what mattered and then stopped. Knowing when to disengage is becoming as important to you as knowing how to help. You might recognize that you are learning to value rest not as absence of effort, but as preparation for clarity. A rested mind notices more accurately. A rested heart cares without strain. You are not becoming less precise. You are becoming more humane, allowing room for imperfection without abandoning your values. You continue, attentive and discerning, refining not just the world around you, but your relationship to responsibility itself, trusting that when your care is guided by intention and compassion, it remains steady, meaningful, and sustainable. You may have noticed that when you trust yourself to pause, your attention does not disappear, it simply changes shape. Instead of scanning for problems, it becomes receptive. You notice what feels settled. You notice what has already been handled. This shift gives your mind a chance to rest without losing its clarity. You often feel most balanced when your role is clear and finite. Knowing where your responsibility begins and ends allows you to give fully without lingering tension. Open-ended duty keeps part of you awake long after the work is done. Completion lets you return to yourself. You might recognize that you are especially sensitive to internal pressure that sounds reasonable but feels relentless. The quiet insistence to improve just one more thing, to check one more detail, to refine even when nothing is truly wrong. Learning to recognize when this voice is helpful and when it is simply habit is part of your growth. You are rarely comfortable with care that is careless. You value intention. You value thought put into action. When effort feels sloppy, you sense the strain it will create later. This awareness makes you reliable, but it can also make it difficult to relax around others who move differently. You may notice that you feel a deep sense of relief when something is handled thoroughly and then released, knowing it will not return, knowing it will not unravel later. This sense of finality allows your body to soften in ways that are hard to access otherwise. You often express compassion through prevention, making sure things do not become harder than they need to be. This care is forward-looking. It saves energy later, even if no one ever notices the problem that never happened. You might recognize that you struggle most when appreciation comes without understanding. Being thanked vaguely for everything can feel less satisfying than someone recognizing exactly what you handled and why it mattered. Precision matters to you, even in gratitude. You are not someone who enjoys improvising in situations that carry responsibility. You prefer to be prepared, to understand the structure before stepping in. This does not make you rigid. It makes you considerate of consequences. You may notice that you feel calmer when your internal standards are allowed to soften without disappearing. When you can aim for care rather than flawlessness. This gentler standard allows you to stay engaged without becoming overwhelmed. You often feel most at ease when your environment supports rest as much as it supports productivity. A space that allows completion, a rhythm that includes pause. Without these, your mind stays alert longer than it should. You might recognize that you are learning to trust your ability to return to a task when needed, rather than holding it constantly in mind. Letting go does not mean forgetting. It means trusting yourself. You are not losing your attentiveness by allowing rest. You are restoring it. Attention that is not overused becomes sharper and more humane. You continue, careful and discerning, learning how to apply your precision where it truly helps, and how to release it where it quietly harms, trusting that when care is balanced with rest, it remains one of your most grounded and sustaining strengths. You may have noticed that when you allow yourself to step out of problem-solving mode, something softer comes forward. Not distraction, not indifference, but a quieter awareness that does not need to correct anything to feel useful. This awareness lets you experience moments as they are, without immediately scanning for what could be improved. You often feel most settled when your efforts are trusted, when others assume competence without oversight. Being monitored drains you more than responsibility itself. Trust gives you space to do things well and then let them be finished. You might recognize that you have a deep respect for work that is done with care, even when it is unseen. Folding something properly, leaving a space better than you found it. These acts feel complete in themselves. They do not require recognition to matter. You are rarely comfortable when the pace of life ignores the need for integration. Being rushed from one task to the next without closure leaves residue in your mind. You prefer rhythms that allow things to conclude before moving on, even if that means going more slowly. You may notice that you feel calmer when expectations are realistic rather than aspirational. Big visions without practical steps feel ungrounded to you. You want to know how something will actually work, not just how it will look. You often experience relief when your internal dialogue shifts from instruction to permission. Allowing yourself to stop, allowing yourself to be finished, allowing yourself to be enough without constant refinement. These permissions feel small, but they change everything. You might recognize that you are becoming more tolerant of others' imperfections as you soften your own. Letting people do things their way without immediately correcting them gives you a different kind of peace. Not because everything is perfect, but because it no longer all rests on you. You are not abandoning your standards. You are learning how to live with them without being ruled by them. This distinction allows your care to remain precise without becoming punitive. You may notice that you feel most grounded when your life includes moments that do not need improvement at all. A walk without purpose, a task done for its own sake. These moments remind you that usefulness is not the only measure of value. You often find that clarity returns when you stop forcing it. When you rest your attention, solutions surface naturally, without pressure. This teaches you that insight does not require constant effort. You might recognize that you are learning to let yourself be supported by systems you have built rather than constantly tending them. When something runs smoothly, you allow yourself to trust it rather than checking for faults. You are not losing your effectiveness. You are refining how you apply it. Care that is rested is more accurate. Attention that is chosen is more powerful. You continue, thoughtful and grounded, learning how to let your discernment guide you without exhausting you. trusting that when your precision is paired with permission to rest, it remains one of your most humane and enduring gifts. You may have noticed that your mind becomes gentler when you stop demanding answers from it immediately. Allowing questions to remain open for a while does not make you careless. It gives understanding time to settle in its own way, rather than being forced into shape. You often feel most capable when your effort feels intentional, rather than automatic. Choosing where to apply your attention restores a sense of agency that constant vigilance quietly erodes. When care is chosen, it feels lighter and more precise. You might recognize that you have a strong instinct to ensure things are handled properly before you can relax. This instinct has kept many things from falling apart. At the same time, you are learning that not every situation requires your supervision to remain intact. You are rarely comfortable with vague reassurance. Being told everything will work out does little for you unless you can see how. You trust structure more than optimism. Knowing the steps matters more to you than hearing comforting words. You may notice that you feel a subtle relief when you allow others to make small mistakes without stepping in. Watching something resolve on its own can be uncomfortable at first, but it also teaches you that your presence does not have to be constant for things to hold. You often express respect by being careful, taking time, checking details, following through. This care is a form of honesty for you. It shows that you take the situation seriously rather than rushing past it. You might recognize that you struggle most when you feel responsible for outcomes you cannot influence. Carrying that weight keeps your mind alert in ways that never quite settle. Learning to distinguish between what you can affect and what you cannot brings unexpected calm. You are not someone who stops caring easily. Even when you step back, part of you continues to notice. The difference now is that you are learning not to act on every observation. Allowing yourself to observe without intervening is becoming a new kind of skill. You may notice that you feel most at peace when your internal standards are allowed to coexist with flexibility. Precision matters to you, but so does humanity. When those two align, your care feels kind rather than demanding. You often experience gratitude, not as something you seek, but as something that settles in when effort feels complete. When a task is done properly and no longer needs revisiting, a quiet satisfaction replaces tension. You might recognize that you are becoming more comfortable, trusting your own sense of enough. Knowing when to stop, knowing when something is finished. This trust reduces the constant pull to refine and correct. You are not losing your edge by allowing rest. You are allowing it to sharpen itself naturally. Attention that is not strained remains clearer and more humane. You continue, careful and discerning, learning how to let your responsibility be guided by wisdom rather than habit, trusting that when your care is balanced with patience, it remains steady, effective, and deeply considerate. You may have noticed that as you practice stopping before everything is perfect, your relationship with yourself softens. You begin to notice how much effort you have already given, rather than only what remains undone. This recognition brings a different kind of steadiness, one that does not rely on constant correction. You often feel most grounded when your day contains at least one moment that is complete, something finished cleanly, something you can leave behind without mental notes attached. These small closures matter more to you than grand accomplishments, because they allow your attention to rest. You might recognize that you have a habit of quietly absorbing responsibility when others hesitate. You see what needs doing, so you do it. Over time, you are learning to pause just long enough to ask whether that responsibility is truly yours. This pause is subtle, but it changes everything. You are rarely comfortable with care that lacks follow-through. Kind intentions without action feel unstable to you. What reassures you is consistency. When something is handled well and stays handled, your nervous system relaxes. You may notice that you feel most at ease when your mind has somewhere to land. A plan that makes sense. A structure that holds. Not rigid rules, but a framework that reduces unnecessary decision-making. This clarity gives you room to breathe. You often experience stress when standards are implied rather than stated. Guessing what is expected creates extra work for you. Clear expectations, even when demanding, feel kinder because they allow you to meet them deliberately rather than defensively. You might recognize that you sometimes postpone enjoyment because something still needs attention. Allowing yourself to enjoy what is already done can feel premature. You are learning that enjoyment does not undo responsibility. It restores you so you can meet it with more care later. You are not someone who avoids complexity. You simply want complexity to be navigable. When systems are clear and intentions are honest, you are remarkably flexible. Confusion, not difficulty, is what drains you. You may notice that you feel calmer when your contribution has a visible boundary. When you can say, "This part is finished," and then stop. Open loops keep part of you alert, even when you are trying to rest. You often express loyalty through reliability. Being the person others can count on matters to you. At the same time, you are learning that being reliable does not require being endlessly available. Limits protect your reliability rather than diminish it. You might recognize that you are becoming more patient with processes that take time. Not everything improves through immediate action. Some things need space to show what they actually are before they can be refined. You are not indifferent to mistakes. You simply want them treated as information rather than personal failure. This perspective allows learning without shame, both for yourself and for others. You may notice that your inner critic becomes quieter when you acknowledge effort as well as outcome. Recognizing what you have tried, not just what succeeded, changes the tone of your self-assessment. You continue, attentive and measured, learning how to apply your discernment where it truly serves and how to let go where it quietly harms, trusting that your care, when guided by clarity and compassion, remains one of your most steady and humane strengths. You may have noticed that when you allow yourself to stop managing every detail, a different kind of order begins to appear. Not the order you impose, but the kind that emerges when things are allowed to settle. This order feels less brittle and more forgiving, and it surprises you by holding even when you are not watching it closely. You often feel most capable when your attention is not split. Juggling too many small responsibilities at once scatters your clarity. When you focus on fewer things with intention, your effectiveness increases and your mind feels calmer rather than strained. You might recognize that you are especially sensitive to obligations that never seem to end. Tasks without closure, roles without limits. These drain you quietly because part of you is always on duty. Learning to create endings, even small ones, helps you reclaim space for rest. You are rarely comfortable with praise that overlooks the process. Being told something turned out well means little to you if the care behind it goes unnoticed. What matters is that the steps were taken thoughtfully. That effort was applied where it mattered most. You may notice that you experience relief when you allow yourself to trust your initial judgment. Second guessing can become a habit, even when your first instinct was sound. Letting that instinct stand without constant revision eases an internal tension you have carried for a long time. You often express respect by preparing carefully, anticipating needs, making sure details are covered. This preparation is not about control. It is about reducing unnecessary strain for everyone involved, including yourself. You might recognize that you struggle when people equate speed with competence. Moving quickly without care feels reckless to you. You value accuracy and intention over urgency, even when urgency is praised. You are not someone who avoids responsibility, but you are learning to question why you take it on so readily. Being useful feels familiar. Being at rest can feel unfamiliar. This contrast is becoming more noticeable as you pay attention to how it affects you. You may notice that you feel most grounded when you allow your standards to be guides rather than rules, when they inform your choices without dictating them. This flexibility keeps your discernment alive without turning it inward as pressure. You often find satisfaction in doing things quietly well and then stepping back, letting the result stand on its own, allowing yourself to be finished. These moments of completion bring a sense of calm that is deeper than accomplishment. You might recognize that you are becoming more tolerant of ambiguity, especially when clarity will come with time. Not everything needs immediate refinement. Some things reveal their shape only after they have been lived with for a while. You are not losing your attention to detail. You are learning how to let it rest between moments of use. Attention that is not constantly engaged remains sharp and ready when it is truly needed. You continue, careful and discerning, allowing your care to move with intention rather than compulsion, trusting that when you honor both precision and pause, your contribution remains steady, thoughtful, and deeply humane. You may have noticed that as you practice stepping back, your trust in yourself deepens. You begin to see that your ability to notice and refine does not vanish when you rest. It waits, and when you return to it, it is often clearer, calmer, and more precise than before. You often feel most at ease when your effort feels aligned rather than constant. There is a difference between being attentive and being on guard. When you allow yourself to move out of constant readiness, your attention becomes something you can choose rather than something that chooses you. You might recognize that you have spent a long time equating care with effort. If something mattered, you worked harder. If someone mattered, you paid closer attention. Now, you are beginning to notice that care can also mean trusting what you have already put in place. You are rarely comfortable leaving things entirely to chance, but you are learning that not everything needs active oversight to remain intact. Some structures hold. Some relationships sustain themselves. Allowing this to be true frees you from unnecessary vigilance. You may notice that you feel a subtle relief when you stop evaluating yourself moment by moment, when you are not asking whether you are doing enough, helping enough, improving enough. This relief creates space where kindness toward yourself can exist without being earned. Thank you for listening to the Sleepy Mind channel. I hope you have enjoyed spending time moving through the world of Virgo.